The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you from whichever part of the world you're in. Thank you once again for joining this our exciting series of IFE's global webinars. Today we have with us a very distinguished speaker. We have Dr. J.P. Offred, who is the co-founder and vice president of the International Academy of CIO, director of research partnerships in the School of Business of George Mason University. You can see his bio in the bottom of the information that was sent to you earlier. The title of his presentation: CIOs and IT Executive Leadership from Engineering Education to Innovations in ICT and Technology. A very timely topic, and I'm sure we will all benefit a lot from this presentation. So I'm going to make the speaker the presenter, and we will be beginning in just a second. Yes, we're all set. JP, go ahead.
Thank you, Christian, and thank you, Hans, for the very kind invitation, and thank you all for joining this morning. The perspective of the talk is that increasingly technology is playing a greater role in society and government and private sector. And there's the engineering and technology aspects, but also the executive leadership aspects. And with that, engineering and education is changing in some ways to keep pace with the technology innovation, but also to keep pace with the leadership and executive challenges. And so just brief outline, I'm going to discuss some of the global trends in technology, background on CIOs and IT executive committees, and then trends in executive education. Actually, if I can excuse myself for a second, I'm going to switch to a current view of the slides. Okay, sorry. And wrapping up with trends in engineering education. So background on setting the scene and the role of technology and the role of engineering society today. Thought I'd start with just two examples of some of the major initiatives or transformations. The first being the Aadhaar digital identity in India. Just in a short number of years, India has provided digital identities to over 1 billion of their population using 10 fingerprints and iris scans, and now increasingly facial recognition. And the motivation is empowerment of the rural poor, but also to some degree to limit corruption in government services. Similarly, Estonia, after only achieving their independence in 1991, a world leader in IT, but also a world leader in adoption of digital government and digital government services, and of course the country where Skype is from and many other technologies. So technology increasingly playing a role in the world and in the role in society. Challenges arise, though, in regard to the management of this technology and the management of the engineering. So in the US, we've had a number of laws over the years to try to strengthen executive leadership in technology, including the role of the CIO. Recently, we had a law in 2015, FITARA, that requires the budget authority for technology within each of the US government agencies to be within the purview of the Chief Information Officer. And now there's a reporting on how the agencies are doing. And societies are looking to technology to adapt to changing societal contexts. So Japan, with a rapidly aging society, is looking towards what they're calling Society 5.0, a super smart society of connecting the physical and the IT. So the transportation systems, the manufacturing systems, healthcare, and IT together to provide a safer, more comfortable life for citizens and residents. The kind of part of the motivation for the talk and the motivation too within engineering curriculums relates to the idea of this slide from World Economic Forum. And the left-hand side shows the policy and governments and regulation capacity of a country related to technology, and the bottom, the x-axis, shows the technological capability. And so it takes both to be quite successful with technology and technology innovation. So you see the countries at the upper right, New Zealand, Canada, Germany, Australia, United States, have both the regulatory and policy and the human capacity as well as technology capability. And you can see some other countries, for example, Philippines, in the middle over towards the right a little bit, really good technology capability, but working towards greater governance and regulation of it. And then the challenges too in regard to being left behind. So 5G showing great promise, but for countries and communities that don't move to 5G, not only might they not have the benefits of it, but at the same time they have risk falling further behind other countries. Some of the global trends that provide some context for the technology and technology innovation and adoption, just going to review 3 or 4. One is urbanization. So it's only recently that over 50% of the world's population live in urban areas. And so here you can see a slide from the United Nations. About 2008, the percentage of the purple line, the percentage of population living in urban areas surpassed those in rural areas. And so for many countries, it's been this way for many years. For example, US and Argentina and European countries, but for other parts of the world, it's a much more recent phenomenon. And the result has been the rapid growth of mega cities. For example, here, this is a several years ago Guardian article showing the rise of mega cities and the great numbers of them. Oftentimes, these are in the developing world, and also the infrastructure hasn't kept pace. The engineering infrastructure of water and electricity, the social infrastructure of jobs and related social inclusion. Some cities, such as Lagos in Nigeria, have grown from about 500,000 40 or 50 years ago to about 20 million today. So that the pace of change has been remarkable in growth, and the engineering challenges remarkable in a similar way. Here you can see a slide, another UN slide, showing that the darker colors, that the brownish are higher percentage urban, and the yellowish is less, and green. So you can see India, not that urban, back in 1970. Here you can see a projection for 2030, and the large red circles are the mega cities of 10 million or more, and predominantly in developing country areas. Second major trend and challenge for engineering and technology is aging society. So Japan, of course, and Korea and Singapore and Taiwan, many European countries approaching 30 or even 40% of the population is 65 years and older, but it's not just developed countries, it's developing countries too in some cases, rapidly aging. So here's a UN slide. The year 2000, you can see that the darker color again is a higher percentage of aged, so Russia and Europe. And you can see the projections for 2050, China, Iran, Chile, so many more countries becoming aged, and developing countries have the risk of becoming older before they have the social infrastructure, before their GDP rises sufficiently to provide a safety net for the elderly. And so that's a major engineering challenge too, and a challenge too for engineering education. And then lastly, chronic illness, only recently here too has the majority of mortality in the world been due to chronic illness as opposed to communicable disease. And here too, it's a worldwide phenomenon. India, for example, has a quite high diabetes rate, but other countries too. That the darker green is higher percentage of prevalence of diabetes. You can see Mexico, Egypt, Libya, Saudi Arabia, India. So challenge for engineering and technology worldwide. It's a policy challenge too. One interesting note is that the highest prevalence of hepatitis C is in Egypt, and the reason for that is a policy failure. A number of years ago, they had a parasitic disease that was people were getting through from the Nile River, and the country inoculated against the disease, but was reusing needles, and so led to the incidence of hepatitis C in the country. So what are the technology foundations then for the great change in enabling the technology? The iPhone, for example, is really quite amazing, or Android, or any of them, but wouldn't have been possible to build these 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, or 15 or 20 years ago, because the technology wasn't developed yet. And there's three main ones. One is storage, computer storage, and it was so today you can go to a computer store and buy 3 or 4 or 5 terabytes of supplemental memory, portable hard drive, for about $50 US or so. The first gigabyte of storage commercially sold was only in 1980, and it was 550 pounds and the size of a refrigerator, and cost $40,000. It was from IBM. So from refrigerator size and $40,000 for 1 gigabyte to 3 or 4 terabytes for $50, the size of a small book, it's been quite remarkable. On the processing speeds, kind of a coincidence, in the early late 60s and early 70s, the first Apple computer had a processor of about 2,000 cycles a second, and coincidentally that was the same as the lunar lander, the first moon landing. And today it's 6 or 7 or 8 billion cycles a second. So there too, remarkable technology change. And also with the transmission speed. So it was only in late 1950s the first transatlantic submarine cable with less than 100 simultaneous calls, and now millions of calls on one cable system. So these are the technologies that enable the smartphone and what we're doing today with computing and sensors. And just as we couldn't have imagined 20 or 30 or 40 years ago what we were doing with technology today, I think it's similarly difficult to forecast what the applications will be for technology 30 or 40 years ago as these underlying technologies continue to develop. This is from a quite good publication out every November from ITU, the Measuring the Information Society, on mobile adoption worldwide. The blue line at the top is the number of mobile phone subscriptions per 100 population. And so worldwide, it's about 107. So more than one subscription per person. And so even in developing countries, it's 80 or 90 in the urban areas, at least, of subscriptions per 100 people. Even a higher, steeper slope, the orange line is mobile broadband. And you can see that's about 70 subscriptions per 100 population worldwide. And so relatively soon, that'll be approaching one subscription per person worldwide, and providing all the capability that the mobile broadband does. But the submarine cables have had a great impact too. The last several decades in Africa, leading to greater access, obviously, but lower cost, and also fostering the development of national backbone networks across Africa. And so most continents now have quite good, and countries have quite good access. Here's another example. This is a remarkable story in Peru, a public-private partnership about 5 years ago, connecting all of the areas of the country, even Andes and Amazon areas, and providing a lot of economic opportunity. So the technology has led to great societal and industry change. Mary Meeker used to be at Morgan Stanley, and then the venture capital firm Kleiner Perkins puts out a report every year and a presentation on the technology in industry and societal change from mobile and digital. And just these examples here of encyclopedia industry, the change in advertising from newspaper to internet to in-app, photography much more oriented towards digital and music and TV, but almost every industry has had major change because of these and major changes for developing the engineering for the industries. And of course, too, engineering and technology are part of all of each of the Sustainable Development Goals and most all of the individual measures. Governments, too, adapting the technology. This is a fairly indicative type of development path for digital government. This is Taiwan, but similar for Korea and Japan and Singapore, moving from informatization of government and government records to a smart and intelligent society, anytime and anywhere services for the residents and citizens, and moving towards a co-creation of digital services created by both the government in partnership with the residents and citizens. Here's something we do with International Academy of CIO, do a digital government rankings every year of 65 countries. And the rankings include technology measures, but also role of CIO in government. So this is the 2017 news stories about the rankings. And the opportunity is, part of the opportunity is coming from the mobile phone to provide services that weren't accessible previously economically in many regions. So this is an example from Mexico from a GSMA report. 39% at the time had financial services, but 94% had mobile phones. So the mobile phone providing opportunity and access for digital services across the world. And the technology doesn't need to be very advanced. This is an SMS program, IBM and Novartis, and the Tanzanian government to alleviate stockouts for malarial medicines in rural areas. The mortality is quite high for children under 5 with malaria if they're not treated. And the rural clinics had stockouts quite consistently. And so the program was technologically not that involved, just to have the rural clinician SMS text message the health ministry when they were at the reorder point for the medicines, and they would be restocked. So just a simple text message, but having a big impact. And then at a broader level, the idea of digital transformation prevalent across most every government and company, larger company. Different definitions of this. This was a McKinsey definition. Oftentimes the definition isn't as oriented towards disrupted or disrupting or radical reinvention, but much more evolutionary. So adopting technology for furthering either the business's strategic objectives or government. At the same time, recognizing from the Mary Meeker slide that some industries can be at risk. So as I mentioned, India using technology as a means for transforming the economy. So moving from the digital identity to providing bank accounts for 200 million rural poor to an increasing number of digital and online services. Rwanda is a model example post-conflict of becoming a knowledge society and adopting technology. And Kazakhstan more recently just developing or adopting a digital transformation plan. So wanted to look a little bit at some of the newer technologies and then look at leadership and governance and education. So some of the technologies that are very current and important and have both engineering and policy implications. There's a really fantastic Asia Development Report study from last spring, a year ago, on the potential impact of robotics in Asia developing countries. And it looked at the industries or segments of industries such as textiles, where conceptually robotics could have an impact or replace human staff, and those where it would be economically viable. And so that varied from country to country. So in some cases, the labor rates were higher, and there was a risk or potential for robotics, but in others, there wasn't, where they had lower labor rates. So here's just some examples. A more human robot from Japan. The bottom left is kind of interesting, an English-speaking robot from Korea. But I think it demonstrates, in conjunction with the picture on the right, that the changes in robots, that they're much more mobile, much larger and more interactive, and provide increasing interactions with humans, with the benefits, but the corresponding risks. So a policy consideration with them in many cases. Drones too, both potential and risks. This is a drone from Rwanda. I think Zipline is the company, providing pharmaceuticals out to the rural areas, Rwanda being quite mountainous. So the risk side of this too, we've seen with many of the airports, including with Heathrow being shut down because of drone incursions. And Airbnb and others moving towards helicopter and drone type flights. And then last two, artificial intelligence also. This was from a number of years ago in the late 90s when Deep Blue with IBM defeated the world champion Garry Kasparov. But artificial intelligence being embedded more and more in industry and government and society, and major policy implications for trust and political legitimacy and awareness and algorithmic transparency. So understanding what the algorithms are truly doing. So if it's something like a medical diagnosis type of AI, or crime AI, really understanding what the recommendation is and why, important for society and all concerned. And then open data, obviously, and blockchain. Okay, so what are the risks then of technology, and what are the ramifications for engineering education? I mentioned one, the digital divide, both for adopting technology initially, whether it be the elderly or countries that don't have a technology background or heritage, or sometimes economically. So Australia and others now sunsetting 2G networks, and for residents and citizens who can't afford the upgrades to 4G and increasingly starting 5G, countries looking to provide mechanisms so that the citizens continue to have access to phones and services. Cybersecurity, too, a major risk. This is an example from ransomware in Atlanta, which has been, ransomware has been an issue in the US, but in other countries too. Increasingly also, the critical infrastructure, networks are connected to critical infrastructure where historically they haven't been. Water and electric and traffic control systems, airport systems, and many challenges of cybersecurity in those systems, partially because that they can't be offline, partially because the patching is much different in the patching cycles, partially too, oftentimes they're running on unsupported operating systems, still in some cases on Windows XP, for example. So this too, a major challenge and risk. Regulation risk, for example, with medical devices. So medical devices now increasingly connected to the internet. And the drug regulators, like the US, we have the Food and Drug Administration, have the challenge of ascertaining or defining what good cybersecurity practices will be on a medical device. They're not able to test them, obviously, and there have been medical devices recalled because of poor cybersecurity. So the first one in the U.S. was a infusion pump for the saline solution at the bedside in a hospital, but it didn't have good cybersecurity on it. And countries, too, developing cybersecurity strategies and policies. The ITU has a quite good site listing which countries have these and providing access to the actual policy that they have. So countries trying to, and companies trying to foster executive leadership for technology. As an example of one law in the U.S., late 90s, Klinger-Cohen Act, which required the role of Chief Information Officer in government agencies. Other countries have these too. Thailand and Japan. Canada requires a CIO through their Treasury Board, but many countries require the CIO, or they may well call it something else, but an IT executive leader within government ministries. And they oftentimes too define the role by core competencies. Skip that. You can see this is a more recent set of core competencies that they're technology oriented, enterprise architecture and technology assessment, information assurance, but also business and policy and leadership. So well-rounded technology leader, whether it be in government or private sector. Cybersecurity too is moving this way, I think. The Chief Information Security Officer role has been quite technical, but more and more it's executive leadership. So communicating the value of cybersecurity across the company or government agency, while still being able to communicate about technology and to staff and oversee large-scale procurement. This is the more recent U.S. law, which I mentioned, FITARA, again, to strengthen the role of CIO in government. So what's happening then in engineering education to keep pace with both the change in technology, the increasing challenge of technology leadership, and the increasing balance between technology and technology policy and regulation? I think one is the idea of a combination of engineering with an overlay of management and leadership. And there's two types of these. I think the more prevalent one is an example from Purdue on the bottom, the idea of a professional master's program. Started initially within science, and from Sloan Foundation, sponsored about 200 of these programs. It's the idea of it is that many engineers and many science master's degree students aren't going to continue on to a PhD and aren't going to have a career path as a university professor or as a PhD in industry. And many go into industry directly with their master's degree. But while they're quite capable technologically and from an engineering perspective or a physics perspective, they might not be quite ready for the professional work environment. And so these types of programs add on to the core curriculum, project management and leadership and communications. A further step towards that is the idea of an engineering management degree or master's degree, where the management part isn't just an overlay, but it's more and more formally integrated into the curriculum. I think this is a trend to some degree, that at least the professional master's type program, or the overlays of job readiness and career readiness for students upon graduation. Other ways that universities and universities programs achieve this, obviously, too, are internships and career experience while in at university or while obtaining a master's degree or undergraduate degree. I'm sorry. Second trend, I think, is this idea of lifelong education. Stanford had a study several years ago looking back from the future as to what the universities of the future would be, to try to back into it. And one of the main elements was lifelong learning. So with technology changing so rapidly and becoming more integrated, the question is how to stay current. So there's the credentials and the certifications and the CPE, but more and more engineering schools, as well as universities overall, providing more formal paths for alumni and non-alumni to stay engaged with courses and coursework and in industry. Third change, I think, is this isn't a shift away from. I think this is an addition. So in addition to formalized degrees, increasing the opportunity for certificates and what are called badges, which are really quite short courses or sets of modules, and then providing a credential. So many of these are quite good. These have somewhat followed on the MOOC trend, the massive online courses that many universities provide. And in those, that they're available online at no charge, and that's the way they were offered initially or provided initially. But not many students would stick with the courses all the way through, and so universities started to provide a credential. So for those who stuck with the course all the way to the end and did the assignments, the universities would provide a credential, and for those sticking through it, the university would charge a small amount. And so from that MOOC idea, developed this badging idea to instead of having it as a part of a massive online course, have established badges or short modules that students can take and develop expertise and credentials. So the value in these, for there to be value in these, the students learn, and at the same time there has to be a perceived value on the part of companies, and there increasingly is. And so I think this is a trend. So it's a way for universities and students to keep up with the major changes. Universities are able to develop these much more quickly than a full course or curriculum, and offer them more quickly. So here, this is relatively new from Creighton, a drone aviation one, but there's many like these. And then online learning too, having a big impact. The students can be from around the world, in many good programs and opportunities to interact with students from around the world. Also, it's providing ways universities are providing a lower cost curriculum through these. So Georgia Tech has a master's in computer science, and I believe also a new one in cybersecurity that they're providing at a quite a bit of a lower price than attending in person and at the university. So increased access to around the world, and increased access to rural areas, or to students, more students who have work or family life that precludes them from attending a university full time. And then too, there's a lot of technology experiments at universities and with curriculum. This is from a medical school, but engineering schools are doing this too with virtual or augmented reality. Oftentimes it's within the classroom of a formalized master's program. Other times it's within a certificate or a badge. But experimentation with virtual reality, experimentation a lot with the mobile phone, experimentation too with in-game learning, learning and through a mobile game or a computer game, both from a university course, also for a lot of health ministries are using these too, for example, for AIDS awareness. So I think this too will have a big impact, or is having a big impact. I think it's back to the idea of anytime, anywhere that governments look at for digital government services. But here it's anytime, anywhere education and with any type of device. So with that, I'd like to say thank you. It was quite kind of a quick tour, but I think see the impact of technology all around us, but also the challenges and the risk. And the engineering schools are keeping up and trying to adapt the curriculum in ways so that the current students and prospective students, as well as graduates and alumni, it can further their careers, but also further their lives and contributions, but also enhance the curriculums that schools are able to offer. So thank you, Hans, and thank you, Krishna.
Thank you, JP. This is just amazing, fascinating tour of the of how the rapidly changing technologies are now creating a challenge for our educators to keep up with that. You know, the issue really is that education institutions are much more slow at adapting themselves or changing compared to the technology out there, and that's really, I think, in the last few slides when you pointed out these modular approaches, the badges, and so on. I think there's the whole era of completely changing the model for engineering education so that the graduates are better prepared to be agile and adapt to all these changing technologies is really at the core of what you're saying. So let's start a discussion here, and with various people who are in this forum. About 40 people are here. Hans, you want to jump in? We've got other people here. You might unmute yourself, Hans. We got Uriel. We got a few other folks in here that you know, from around the world who might be willing to jump in and provide some comments. So let's get started.
Thank you very much, Krishna. JP, I found you to be one of the really most thoughtful presentations that I've heard in quite some time in our very interesting series here led by Krishna. In particular, I wanted all of our friends who are here today know that the IFE Secretariat and GDC Secretariat is on the campus at the School of Engineering at George Mason University, where you are a very important professor, not only connected with the engineering, but also other departments. And I just wanted all of us to be aware of that. But a question that I have is, obviously, you've mentioned a number of universities. You mentioned Purdue, Stanford, Penn State, and others per se. I'm just wondering if you could give us some, just a couple of comments of what are some of the challenges that a university such as George Mason has to implement some of these very important changes, but not only impacting the engineering, but other disciplines, including the social sciences and others at George Mason University, as you see it. I would appreciate some comments from you about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. I think most universities are oriented towards fostering interdisciplinary academics and academic programs, as well as interdisciplinary research. And the government funding agencies and private sector companies here in the US and around the world also, such as National Science Foundation, are trying to foster the multidisciplinary research and programs. I think part of the challenge within a university is the incentives and motivations and business models. So there's the incentives and motivations for the individual professor for promotion and tenure. And so their individual school may or may not promote the multidisciplinary work through this promotion and tenure. And then there's also the business model of the university, how an individual school receives revenue, the degree to which it's from tuition, and what the sharing mechanisms are between one school and another. So here at George Mason, we've I think done okay, partnering amongst the schools. I think other schools are further along. I think Duke University has done tremendously in trying to foster multidisciplinary education and research. So I think it takes a will, both on the part of the schools, engineering schools and other schools, the professors, but as well as institutional and presidential and provost support.
Yeah, that's really amazing. Well, one of the comments from one of our people, quite a few of our audiences is from India, as you might realize, and then you did bring up several examples of how India is adapting to this changes in technology through the Aadhaar card and Digital India and so on. So I think that's really fascinating. At the same time, there are hundreds of engineering colleges in India who, again, not just trying to emulate what the West has done in terms of traditional courses and curriculum. I think here's an opportunity for some of these newer colleges to really take a different path. And one of our Anil Kumar Pandit has has brought up this issue, and I can unmute Anil if you want to do, if you have a comment on that about how do you create these low-cost courses and badges for students and professionals in different parts of the world, and that's really something that we'd like to take a serious look at. And already there is some work being done by some of the colleges on trying to use MOOCs and fractional credits, short courses and so on. So Anil, go ahead, jump in there and tell us.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you can hear me fine.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, in fact, actually, I like that idea that alumni becoming a lifelong learner and getting associated with with their alma mater, whatever. Now, 2-3 things. One is the low-cost courses, and I especially like the idea of badges, which in a way is being looked at as partial credits and things like that in India. But this, if it is available through MOOCs or whatever good means, and credentials established that yes, learning has really happened, that is fantastic, and it could be open for students, faculty, professionals, anyone. So how can IUC help in promoting that in India? That is my question.
Just for JP's benefit, IUC is our Indo-Universal Collaboration of Engineering Education, which Anil and I have been involved with. So just for background there, but go ahead, Anil.
Yeah, I mean, it covers something like over 60 good engineering institutions. I mean, that's the supplement I wanted to give.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess the JP, this concept of badges, how far has it evolved, and where do we stand? Because that looks like an extremely high potential area for educators to look into.
I think it's quite early. I think it's evolving too. I think one idea related to it that's kind of interesting in with master's degrees or undergraduate degrees is George Mason, or maybe it's US, but maybe it's broader than this, call it on-ramp and off-ramps for programs. So the degree to which someone could take a course or two or certificates or a series of badges and then aggregate those together and enter a master's program or a undergraduate program and have that work count towards their degree path. And then similarly, an off-ramp that someone's engaged in a master's degree and then could adapt the last part of it to tailor it towards what path they do. So I think the success of badges ultimately will be the degree to which universities are able to connect them to other offerings and students be able to mix and match their educational path.
Yeah, it looks like just going along with the increase in exponential improvement technology, that same technology can actually be used to create these courses and offer them to the students in a more flexible manner. And I think that's really the beauty of it. If you can get people from industry and from various walks of life who have kind of content that can be packaged in small modules. There's technology available to deliver them, and I think that should be at very low cost. So that's something that maybe we should all look at. Hans, I think that's something that we should look at IFES and say, what can we do? How can we look around the world and say who are offering these these short modules in different areas, and see if we can promote them, package them, do whatever we can in that area. It's fascinating. Okay, guys, more discussion, more comments. I think I see Andrei Rusinski, my friend, here. I didn't notice you. So if you have any comments from you, Andrei Rusinski, I can unmute you if you wish. Andrei, how are you?
Well,
you have a microphone? Okay, go ahead, Andrei.
Yes, first of all, I'm very happy to sort of reconnect with you guys. I miss you very much. So I promise that I'm going to be much better from now on. I have established my retirement life right now, and I'm working on grand challenges. And one of the things what I would like to discuss with you is I'm an expert working for the European Union Commission, shaping up the vision for Europe after the year of 2030. And I would be very much interested in talking to my friends in India and also in the United States and to IFES to have your thoughts, because we may have an impact to shape up Europe, 20, 30 years from now. So I would be more than happy to reconnect and have a discussion how we can help Europe using our international and global connections. Because, I believe that our perspective, looking at global issues and working with India and other countries, can be of a great help for Europe, which is still very much focused on herself. So that's my comment. And thank you very much for Krishna for making this comment and having an opportunity of talking to you. I'm in the States right now, so I will get back to you, to both of you, Hans and you, Krishna, and talk to you in person.
Okay, thank you, Andrei. Okay, let's look for other comments, questions, and plenty of comments saying very informative webinar. Thank you. Kindly share your PowerPoints. Just as usual, we have a recording of this webinar, and we will be making it available to those who want to have it. Okay, so that's fantastic. And let's see anybody else. Let's wait to see if other discussion, other comments come in. Anybody that's got my friend, I noticed we got a bunch of people that I know that, but you just have to text and let me know if they want to talk. I don't want to put them on the spot by calling on them right away. I think Uriel was here, but he has since just slipped out as another mentioned his name.
Yeah, by the time JP is JP, I have a question for you. This is Anil. Are the badges really a physical badge you can put on the lapel, or is it something only visible on the site?
Go ahead, JP.
I think it's more digital, probably. Although I imagine some universities are giving something physical too.
So you mentioned a few universities. What can you repeat the names of those universities so that maybe I can try to follow up with some of them?
Well, the professional science masters and professional engineering masters, there's quite a few universities that are doing those, and then the certificates and badges, quite a few too. I can send you a list if you'd like.
If you get a list of them, I might just connect with them and see if there are some of the badges that can be exportable to the rest of the world, because that's happening with the MOOCs. We're finding that more and more of the colleges in India are reaching out to the MOOCs and making the MOOCs in themselves as part of the curriculum. They're letting the students to take a MOOC and then use that for a 3-credit course as part of the curriculum. So they're having this kind of flexibility. And so if you have these badges and stuff that's available from around the world, we can have a global community that is sharing some of these common concepts and common content that could be very useful. And that's really what IFES and GEDC and our organizations are our objectives. So that would be great if we can connect with that. So Hans, if there's some way that we can collect, help JP put this information together, I think we can share it with the rest of our community. That'd be great.
Well, JP and I, hopefully we can meet soon, next week before I travel again. And I fully agree with you. The gentleman from Europe, I couldn't understand his name, but I'm certainly interested. Europe is very important, and we are thinking very seriously of having one of our next global conferences in Europe, and that could be also an opportunity to connect with some of the issues we're discussing today.
Yeah, that was Andrei Rusinski. He has been a faculty member at the University of New Hampshire for many years, and he's an associate with IFES, with IUC, and I think you may remember him. He was involved something with Kazakhstan and some other efforts.
That's right. It's been some time. It was wonderful.
It's been a while. Yeah, he's just retired. I think now he's finding more time. So I'm glad to see. He's a big guy. If you want to imagine his face and name, he's a nice, jolly big guy, Andre. So that's good.
Yeah, it's still the same. So thank you very much.
Jolly big guy. Okay, I'll be smiling.
The best description of me I have heard in my life. So thank you very much.
Okay, so let's see. Thank you again. Some other people are saying thank you for this, etc., but no specific points of discussion. I think should encourage everybody that joins these things to just join in the discussion, so we can all be working together. So anyway, that's great. I think we probably should terminate this thing. We are pretty much running out of time anyway. So thank you so much, JP, for taking your time and giving us this very exciting global perspective with really the opportunity to think in details and work something concrete to benefit the future generations who really need to be prepared to be innovative, because there's nothing that they can draw on. The current technology and stuff is going to be outdated within a few years, and they have to reinvent and re-innovate and build the things on their own. I think that's the biggest message that we should give out to students, that you really cannot depend on just memorizing stuff and passing exams with the content available today, but you should be able to create your own content and build on it and solve problems as you go along. So thank you so much for doing this, JP. Any closing comments from you?
Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Hans, and thank you everyone for joining.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.